My name is Dale Brown, and I am working on the orientation for Theologians Without Borders. Really appreciate Stephanie Black and her work in getting this together. So this assignment is to take 5 minutes and relate my experience of meeting with a friend of mine from another culture and explaining how that conference went. So I met with a woman named Sabia, and she is of Indian origin. She's a Muslim. She's a medical social worker, and she works with me in the hospice team taking care of patients who are at the end of life. And I've known Sabia for several years now, and she is truly an amazing woman. She is just has a sense of peace around her that is quite inviting and quite amazing. But we sat down, and it was wonderful to get to talk with her about this assignment. And briefly, her history is she really is a mixture of many cultures. Her granddad came from India and moved to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, when he was 20. So Sabia's parents and herself and her other her siblings were born in Tanzania in this Indian subculture, which is a very prominent culture in East Africa. They are merchants, they run restaurants and that kind of thing. So Sabia, her ethnic origin is India, and they practice the Indian holidays and eat Indian food and engage in Indian rituals. But her faith is Muslim, and so Sabia is an active practicing Muslim here in North Austin, Texas. She's married and has 2 children, and they're very active in their mosque. Sabia also is an American. She moved here from Tanzania when she was 16 years old, and that was almost 20-something years ago. And at that time, she became a student at the University of Texas, which she said was quite a cultural shock, moving into a place as big as UT and then becoming a student here. Sabia wears the hijab, so she says that draws some attention sometimes, but Austin is a really multicultural city, very international because of the state capital here and the enormous University of Texas, my own alma mater, I might add. And it has a huge international presence and has just a great reputation for its innovation and advancements in technology. So if you're going to be in a place in Texas and you're going to be Muslim and wear the hijab, then Austin is probably one of the best places to be. But Sabia really, she said that she and her husband feel like they are Americans. She says her children who were born here really feel like they're Americans. But she says she and her husband don't really feel a sense of rootedness in home because of such a varied background. But she says and her husband talk about this, and they think that's a good thing. They've been able to pull from every culture and really enjoy the best of each culture. As a Muslim, I was interested in how she has experienced her faith in this country, especially in the last 20 years since 9/11. And she said that she did notice a big change that happened when the Oklahoma City bombings happened in 1994, I believe that was. She said things changed, even though it was a white guy who did that, white nationalists, that initially they thought it was Muslims who did that, and so they came under suspicion. Then she said 911, as expected, really did change the atmosphere. But she did not count that as a bad thing. She said that she had to then learn how to explain her faith in a non-threatening way. And all Muslims here have had to do that. She was a little shocked when I expressed that in our churches we have armed police presence because of so many church shootings have happened here in the U.S. And just a year and a half ago here in near us, 60 miles away, Sutherland Springs, where a young man went into a Baptist church and shot up and killed about 20 people and injured at least that many more. So she was surprised that in America faith is in some ways under attack in synagogues, mosques, and churches, and all of us have to be aware of that. But she said she didn't want to give in to that fear because that would be giving in to what what these terrorists would want us to do. I did ask Sabia about a couple of cultural issues. One is that time or event thing that works in the majority world, minority world, minority world focusing on time, and majority world focusing on event. And she said she really is focused on time. Her subculture in India, where she grew up, is the upper class, middle upper class of Indian businessmen and entrepreneurs, and they get things done by focusing on time. But now she's trying to become a little more event oriented and slow time down a bit. I also asked her about money and knowledge. In my work in Africa, I've noticed that Africans really think possessions are to be freely shared and knowledge to be held. And we as Americans hold tightly to our possessions but freely give our knowledge. And that has created some interesting dynamics overseas. Just going through some of the questions here that was from our reading. I really appreciated the reading and made me think. I'm going to continue doing some reading in the Cross-Cultural Connections book. And also I would recommend Jared Diamond's book, The World Till Yesterday, about how tribes in the past and today differ from our own culture. And I'm speaking of minority world, Western culture, technology driven and everything, and how some of those things are good and some of those things aren't so good. Incredible read. But things that really jumped out at me about this reading were this phrase, I'm going to read it here, is listening is so close to loving that most people can't tell the difference. And I really would totally agree that in cross-cultural relationships or any relationship, it just begins with a heart that's really interested in the other person. My new wife, Kelly, and I are pretty shocked at times at how self-focused people are. And even if you come and say something like, I may have cancer, they immediately go into their own story of how they may have had cancer and how that impacted them. So Americans seem pretty focused on themselves and unwilling to hear someone else's story and have compassion. But I've traveled the world over with my dad in his business, and then as a pastor, as a short-term missionary in Africa, and I love to hear the stories of people. So part of this reading was about embracing differences and trying not to get too caught up in what's right and what's wrong, and trying to figure out really what is we determine culturally is right and culturally what is we would say is wrong, and not imposing that on other people. So I enjoy listening to other people from all cultures. When I travel just for pleasure, I'm always try to get with just the ordinary folks. I love to go to big city markets like in Athens or somewhere where real people are haggling and bartering and making their lives work, or out on the streets where real life happens, not in the touristy hotels where fake life seems to be the order of the day. So people have amazing stories, and the only way to hear those stories is to really listen and genuinely engage in those stories. One of the questions was how to build trust with other people in other cultures, and I would have to admit, at this stage in life and having tried to do things in other cultures, trust is easily built, or friendships are easily built on the surface. But then if you're somewhere a long time and try to get things done, as we have tried to get things done in East Africa, then it becomes more complicated, and the subtle cultural differences related to time and event, and especially money and knowledge, those subtle differences really come out when you try to work with partners in a country, indigenous partners, to build something or start a new ministry. And the differences in how we communicate and how we share knowledge or withhold knowledge according to that culture really make a huge, significant difference. Even here in the U.S., I became pastor of a small church south of Austin that had, they say there were one congregation, and they technically were all members, of this church, Baptist church, 50 English speakers, and about 70 Spanish speakers. And the subtle cultural differences in how these two groups related to one another and actually did church together and gave and spent money together was pretty profound. And in this part of Texas, there's a very strong subculture, Hispanic subculture. And the folks in our church came from 7 different Latin countries. So it wasn't just Mexicans, it was from all over the Latin America. But I had to work really hard to figure out how to get the the English speakers to really value the non-English speakers, the Spanish speakers, and the subtle differences were just really a challenge. Unfortunately, I had to leave that church before I could really dig in, but I know that my experience there really showed me, even here in America, how incredibly important it is to really listen to other stories and really kind of suss out what is going on in someone's heart and mind. I have one of the questions here is about broken trust, and I feel like I have experienced that working with a particular one pastor overseas, and he did not divulge information to the organization that I was working with about his own income and sources of income, and it helped me to understand that in East Africa, everybody's just trying to survive, and they're withholding knowledge, and that's the way their culture is. But it was hard to regain trust with that guy. He's an amazing pastor and everything, but it was all related to how they value money and how they value knowledge. So those differences are subtle and need to be worked with. Just the last thing here, related to being in a different culture. It's a really incredibly important to, if you're invited to go to someone's home, and I think that is, I used to think that was a big sacrifice because I was pretty particular in what I ate when I was younger, but now it's just amazing to go into someone's home and then to eat what they place in front of you and relish it, and it just bridges a huge gap and builds a great friendship and builds great trust. The other thing I've learned in working in other cultures is if you just try a little bit to to speak their language and let them teach you, then that builds trust as well. They love it in whether it's Africa or Guatemala. They just love it when I try to learn their language. So, just a few thoughts in this assignment. I've gone a little longer, but I sure have enjoyed it. Thanks.